In manufacturing, we know that so much is dependent on how many parts did we make in the last hour or what our performance is. And then that often ties into personal careers and your performance matters. But is your performance the only factor, the main factor in your own career progression and the results you desire? Well, I don't know, but I got a friend here, Susan Barber, on the show today, who's going to help us maybe think a little different about that. Welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I'm excited to be here.
After 25 years at Kraft Heinz, working in leadership roles, being in that corporate life, you and I both started our journey on entrepreneurship around the same time. You were about
hmm
2015, I was about
hmm
2016. Then you wrote this fascinating book, The Visibility Factor. I've read that and it really helped me kind of think a little bit different about on this show we talk about how we show up impacts how people feel. How we make them feel determines the extent that we can engage with you. Relationships do matter, but we really think a lot about how we move forward is just performance. But you've done some research on this and you've got a different view our listeners need to hear.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is my own story. I was in craft, as you mentioned, and was in sales, supply chain. A lot of times I had some imposter syndrome and was holding myself back because I didn't have IT degrees. And so I thought, I don't belong at that table with those people. They all know way more than I do. But what I had to realize is that I had a lot of other unique things coming up from the business. A lot of other people in IT didn't have that. So I think it's about starting to recognize what you do have to offer and what makes you unique and what you bring. But it's also about talking about the results that you get and the things that you're doing. If you're not talking about them, no one may know, especially in the world we're in today. It's super busy. Everybody's got a million meetings and a million things going on. And it's good to get in front of people and let them know the accomplishments that you're making or that your team is making or the work that you're doing, but talking about it in terms of value and impact. And I just don't think that's something that people do enough of. They tend to just say, I did this, I did this, I did this, but they don't really talk about why it matters. And that is
Mm.
the important piece. So whether you're in manufacturing or in sales or whatever you're in, I think it's important to really have that lens on when you talk about what you're doing so that people can hear it and see it from you.
Yeah, so this is where we struggle. There's that person in the room just talking about I did this and I figured this out and this is what our team and that's where I think we get confused sometimes on, visit when you talk about visibility,
hmm
relationships, bragging versus, I'll just do a good job, Sue, and people will notice, right?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with that same messaging. If you work hard, people will notice, you'll get promoted. And that was really the core message of the visibility factor. You can do that, but it's not actually going to be the thing that gets you noticed. Eventually, you have to start talking about what you're doing. And so I got my own feedback at one point in time where I thought I was doing all the right things. I was a top talent. I was sitting in the room, but I wasn't sitting at the table. And so it became
Mm.
very apparent that I became a little complacent. I had to start to think about how can I talk about what I'm doing but not brag because that was the reason I didn't want to do it. I just felt like that was a little icky for me and it wasn't authentic. I spent some time observing other people and I realized they're just offering to help. They're just sharing what they can do. They're just suggesting things. And I thought, well, I can do that. That's not that hard. Why am I making this so hard? It may be because they're the louder voice. People see it and hear it more and think, I'm not that style person. I'm more introverted. I can't do that. But I feel like it's so important to put your voice out there, even if it's just asking a question, even if it's just suggesting something based on what someone else has said. You need to get your voice out there because if not, when decisions come down to keep this person or not, if no one knows who you are, you could be on the list. Nobody wants
Hmm.
that. So I've seen plenty of clients that have saved themselves, I'll say, right, from being on a list because of doing what we talk about here today.
And I like to like when I read your book, it made me think about, we have a responsibility to be visible because, each of us have unique talents, right? And the reason great plants run well, it's like the machinery, right? All the machinery has all the cogs in the wheels, and everything has to connect and flow at the right time. Well, it's like that with the people in the organization. You have a responsibility to make sure people know your story, like where you are adding value and not just listing your accomplishments. When I read your book, it's more about how do you articulate what's going on, and more of a story than a list.
Yeah.
Is that
Yep.
right?
Yeah, you are sharing facts about what's true, but it is about positioning it in a way that the other person can hear it. So, for example, if I'm talking to someone in supply chain, I'm going to use supply chain examples and talk about the things that they care about, what's important to them, why they should be listening to what I have to say, what the impacts are for them. And especially when I was in IT, if we had to take their systems down, of course they're going to care about that. But I had to make it important enough for them to understand why we're doing it, how we're going to do it to make sure that they're not down very long. And so it's about building credibility with someone too. It's about building that relationship and showing them that you are an equal partner and that you have a lot of value to offer and you want to hear what they have to say too. To me, it's all about reciprocity between each other, understanding what we both care about and why we should both have a voice in this conversation. I used to work with a lot of manufacturing leaders at Kraft, and sometimes it feels like you don't have a voice because others are
Hmm.
louder. You have to find ways to get in front of people and build relationships so that you can get your seat at the table, if you will, and start to share what you want to do and what you think.
Fascinating the way that you describe that. I was in the room, but I wasn't at the table.
Hmm.
There is a significant difference. You go into these meetings or rooms, and there's people there, and then there's people that are active. Usually, the
Yeah.
people at a table are more active. I was in a coaching session with a VP and a general manager. There was a corporate meeting, and this person got a seat at the table, and it went really well. What was so cool is it was the questions that the person was asking. This person didn't come in and say, "Hey, I think we should do this," or "This is what I know." He came out with more credibility because he was processing what was going on and then creating deeper discussion to get a better result.
Hmm.
Is
It's
that a right
all
way, Sue?
To me, I think it is. I would say preparing in advance is important. I used to be that person sitting in the room trying to come up with the perfect question. In that moment, you're in fight or flight. Your brain is trying to come up with something brilliant and you can't do it. So I would always suggest to people if you know what the subject matter is in the meeting or what's on the agenda, try to think about 3 or 4 questions that you can have ready or listen to what someone else is sharing and then add on to that. Say, I'd love to hear more about that situation. I think whatever you can do to put your voice out there helps so much. If you can't do it on the fly easily, it might be better to have a couple ready. I'll share my secret that I share with a
All
lot of
right.
people because I think it's really helpful. The only way they know what's happening at the lower levels is to ask questions, right? They're not in all the detail, they don't know all the things. So you'll hear them ask very open-ended questions like, what are we considering for other options? What else is happening in the industry? How's the morale of the team? They're trying to gauge how things really are and take a temperature of where we're at and how we're doing. If you listen to some of those questions and pay attention and write them down, the next meeting you go to, I want you to take them and make them your own. Don't use them verbatim, but make them your own and ask the question before they can. What that does is psychologically, they're like, wow, that person thinks like I do. Ah, they asked that question before I could. How impressive. You immediately build credibility with them, and they don't even realize you just took their question and turned it into your own. Get a list of questions that work within your organization. I have a ton of questions in the visibility factor in the back because those are questions that I used, questions that my senior leadership used. You can turn them into whatever situation you need and use them as well.
That's so cool. Just utilizing the people around us and then being more mindful and paying attention. Oh, okay. I like that question. I'm going to write that one down. Or like, hey, the way that person's presenting is something I want to emulate. And maybe that person is just being, there are those people that just want their voice to be heard in the room.
Of
It
course,
actually
yeah.
decreases the credibility because it's like, most people are going to realize, okay, Trevor's just talking because he wanted his voice to say something as opposed to, oh, that's interesting. So I like the fact that we can just learn from each other and we don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, can I add on to that? Because I had a person like that too. I talk about it in the book. You probably listened to. The interesting thing about that is their voice is out there. And that is what gets you promoted in many ways. When I did research for the book, 74%, I think was the percentage, of companies reviewed why people got promoted and what leaders thought. And what happened is they looked at all of these promotions, and the real key message was these people got in front of me. I saw them. I could see them talking about things. I could see them and picture them in the role. And so if you're not getting
Mhm.
yourself in front of the senior leaders who make decisions or sharing your ideas and thought leadership, then they're not going to think about you. So although those people are talking a lot, they are the only ones talking. And if you want your voice to matter, you have to be at the table too and find ways to bring up important points or think about questions that you can ask. We've all seen this, right? We've all seen people get promoted and we're like, how did they get promoted? They aren't nearly as good as I am, but they are talking more. They're getting in front of
Mhm.
decision makers more. And we're in the back, hiding, doing the work, getting things done, but nobody knows what we're doing. So that is what can happen. And I think we've all seen it.
I get questions like, Trevor, that person's a jerk. And they keep getting promoted. I don't have the perfect answer, but they've got that certain exposure. But that line you just said, let's go back to that. Like, I could picture them in the role. I don't think that's how we think about it on a
No,
daily basis, right? Like, if I'm a team leader, for example, could you picture me as a supervisor? Well, that's going to depend. An old colleague of mine told me these three factors, right? You need the right timing, right? So something has to be going on at the time. And then you have to have that talent or skill that you contribute. And then the third one is you need the right audience, right? Because if you got the right timing and you have the great solution and then nobody sees it, that's that's unfortunately it is important that we are able to articulate and tell our story.
in everything that I've seen, and I've seen so many people that I've worked with personally, it's not as hard as I think people want to make it. Like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out what to say and how to talk to them. If you have a relationship with them, continue to build on that relationship, understand what their challenges are, what their gaps are. How could you help solve them? That's literally like what I used to think about is what could I do to help them? How could
Yeah.
I add value in this conversation? What idea could I take and change or turn into a new opportunity for us in the company or solve a problem? Everybody has problems in companies. Just pick one that you think might really move the needle. Will it save money? Will it save time? Will it improve something for people? Take it and do it and talk about it. A lot of people assume somebody else will take care of that. That's not part of my role.
Mhm.
But your job, I had a brilliant manager, which I'll share with you. He said, you have a job description. Of course, everybody has a job description. If you really want to get promoted, you can't just live by that job description. You have to do more than that. That is the part that people struggle with. What does more mean? Well, it might
Mhm.
mean getting involved in other parts of the organization and helping and supporting them. It might be on a task force. It might be being an employee resource group. It might be mentoring people. You have to show that your reach is more and that you care more about the organization succeeding, not just your specific role or team. It's bigger than that. And that's when people start to notice, and it helps you build your network inside the company in a bigger way. That is also gold because you never know when you might need that.
And you talk about that, right? That's how we kick the podcast off, is that it's not
Hmm.
just performance alone. And part of it is relationships.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, humans do make a decision on who does get promoted and who we put in that situation. I got to know you, and I probably need to have some trust with you. And trust can come from doing what you said you're going to do, doing something that sees you in your current role. When I'm coaching some leaders, are like, nobody's tapping my shoulder to see what's going on next. And I'm like, well, are you engaging with the other departments? How are you elevating others around you? How can you be seen in that next promotion role? And sometimes it's just a mental thing of like, well, how do I do that? Because I don't have the authority or I don't have the title.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah,
that
you
fine,
have.
Sue?
I definitely have seen that for sure. And I think that was some of my own story, right? I just felt like I'm working really hard. They're going to see that. They're going to notice and they're going to tap me on the shoulder. Are you actually asking for what you want? I want a role as a senior leader, or I want to be a supervisor of this production line, or I want to do this. If you're not asking for what you want, they are not mind readers. I'd love to say that they are and they know exactly what you want, but I don't think I did a great job of even asking for what I wanted. I just assumed that people would know. Why wouldn't they just know I want the next level or whatever that looks like? But the second thing is also, we used to say you have to do the job to get the job, which means doing things within your current role that demonstrate leadership, demonstrate that you're ready for the next thing. And that means taking the initiative, doing more than you're asked for, bringing ideas and recommendations into your boss or into someone else and sharing those with them shows that you care enough to do more than maybe someone else
Mhm.
does. And you're trying to stand out, right? You need to stand out compared to everyone else. What I talk about in the new workbook I have, it's called Your Journey to Visibility, and it's allowing people to start to implement more of these things that we're talking about here today. And what I talk about is think about the value and impact that you're making and how can you talk about that? I could say, I put together the new schedule or I put together these reports for us. Fine, that's great. But what else? Why does that matter? I took these reports and I made recommendations for you about the things that you need to really pay attention to on pages 2 and 5. What I thought we could do is come up with solutions as a group and talk about them, and then you could use those to take to, the senior leader. It's that initiative piece, but why is it helping the business? Why is it important? If you're spending your time doing something already, let's make it count.
Mm.
And I find that most people, oh, my boss doesn't have time to listen to me. If you're making their job easier, they will pay attention, I promise you. Because who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want a leader who's got someone under them who's helping them shine too? So there's
Yeah,
a lot of things you can do.
I like that whole fact of, what's bugging you that you might have some type of a solution for, and
Yeah.
then you just put that forward. And it's kind of like, hey, here's something that might make your life easier. Here's a couple ideas around here, pages 2 and 5. Here's some specificity around it. And you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be able to say, hey, this is a problem that I think we can solve. This is our approach. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, if Trevor can do that, then I could see him doing this other task in this role. It's kind of demonstrated some of those behaviors.
The other piece is some research that I found by an author, Harvey J. Coleman. He came to Kraft when I was going through some of my own visibility challenges and brought some brilliance to me that really shocked me. And when he shared it, it's from his book, Empower Yourself. He has this pie chart that shows where your time needs to be spent to achieve career success. When I saw this pie chart, I about fell off my chair because what he says is 10% of your time is spent on performance, doing your job. That's the important things that we feel like we should work on every day. 30% is on your image, your personal brand, what people think of you, your reputation, your strengths. 60% is on exposure, getting in front of senior leaders, spending time talking to them about what you think, sharing ideas, all of these things that we're talking about. So for me, I probably would have said I had 70 to 80% of my time on performance. It was really clear to me that I needed to shift where I spent my time.
No one's talked to me. No one's tapped my shoulder. But the confidence I felt being your reader is that this is in my control and it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be yucky. It can be quite authentic and natural. In your book, The Visibility Factor, you have so many different tactical ideas that readers can take away. And then that step further, your journey to the visibility workbook, you still have great stories in there. I've heard you read it. I don't have it in my hands yet. It's in the mail. You shared some of that in your readings. And I liked how that kind of flowed from stories, but just a deeper dive. Is that kind of the next phase? If the listener's thinking, "Okay, which one should I buy first?"
I think of the visibility factor as the foundational understanding of what visibility is, what imposter syndrome is, limiting beliefs, things that hold us back. It does offer hundreds and hundreds of ideas and actions based on your strengths. So
Does.
it might be you're a writer, you're a speaker, you like to do volunteer things, you like to manage teams. I wanted it to be easy and accessible for people. And those are ideas I used, my clients have used, my team used. So it's really easy to apply. And there's a way to make a plan within that book. The visibility factor was what I talked about in many, many conversations and presentations and workshops. And what came out of those was I'd really like to have some templates too. I'd really like to have you create some things that make it really easy for me. At least my generation grew up on Mad Libs, right? Where you have this little speech that you want to make and you have blanks and you can fill in the blanks with your stuff. So I created some of that. I have AI prompts. I have podcasts galore based on
Yes,
whatever
you.
chapter you're reading. So I think I wanted to make it very easy for people to come into this, and I call it choose your own adventure, which is pick what you need Do you need to review where you might have started being less visible and look back on your career? So that's the first part of the book. There are some pieces of the visibility factor in chapter 4, but not a ton. It's more to set the stage for someone who
Mhm.
hasn't read the first book. And then we look at personal brand, perception, value, and confidence. Once you know those things about yourself, then you can go into what are my challenges, whether that be communication, influencing others, being strategic and leading. And once you know those answers, then we have tons of solutions in the back, the last 3 chapters that help you with that. So my goal is to help you wherever you are. And so I can't know that since I'm not with you. But one of my really big things is making sure that you feel like you have a coach with you along the way. I think that definitely came through in the first book, and I wanted to continue that in this book as well. It is filled with stories too, for sure.
Great story.
I have some client stories, my own stories. People learn through stories and they can see themselves and see what's possible. And that's what I want them to be able to do.
How to advocate, for ourselves, because it is that responsibility. You start with the thought, these are a couple ones that I like: good enough to get hired, not good enough to get promoted. And sometimes that just becomes a story in our mind,
Yeah.
right? But really, you have important thoughts to help, and you have a responsibility to be visible and add value. The visibility is just a quality or state of being visible. And it's everything when you think about it. And it is your responsibility. It's not your
Yeah.
boss's. The
Oh,
boss is there to support it, but it's in your control. I feel like when I listen to your podcast or read your book, it's like Susan's with us. You're with us, you're just encouraging us, but you're not telling us, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You're just saying, these are some approaches. This may work for you, or this may work for you. And there's no right path to becoming visible.
I think it's based on everybody's comfort level, authenticity, what they want to look like, how they want to show up. And I think everybody has different strengths. What I found interesting as I was doing workshops is people would talk about, well, I'm really good at this. I said, does anyone know that? Well, no, I've never shared that with anyone. Or I've never shared that I used to work at this company and I did this. I'm like, okay, why? What's preventing you from doing that? Well, I just didn't think that they would care about that.
Mm.
That's part of why I have part 1 of the workbook, because I want you to go back and start to really pay attention to what you did in your first job. What did you do recently that you've forgotten about? I have a really cool visibility timeline in there that is look at where you've been visible throughout your career. You can pick whatever times you want. Where were you visible and why were you able to do it then? And where did you have a missed opportunity for visibility and what prevented you from being visible? Because when you can start to look at that, it starts to help you understand, oh, I felt safe in this role. My boss cared about me. I was able to be visible. The
Mm.
role I'm in now, my boss doesn't care about me at all. I feel like I'm not safe.
Mm.
So that's something new, right? I've learned
Yeah.
about myself. I need to have a place where I feel safe, which is true in any situation. Honestly, you can't be visible if you don't feel like you can be safe. The goal is to help people understand what may be holding them back. And then what do we do about that? How do we start to pay attention to that and change it?
Yeah, even when you're in a safe environment. So I was in a very safe environment. Our author group, right? We met through
Mm-hmm.
AJ Harper in the top three
Yeah.
workshop, and she did a workshop on dialogue. And she's asked, what's the most famous movie that really has a famous lines for demonstrating great dialogue? And I thought about the answer right away, but I didn't say it because I thought this movie has too much action. Do you know what?
I was there. Oh, Star Wars, right?
Yes, it's right away. I thought, I'm your father. And but I thought, no, that's just me because I'm Star Wars and I'm kind of like that. And it's like, and it's just that whole thing of like, ask the question, right? And I was like, I am like, oh, well, I don't want to say that. But so like, even though I'm just reading your book and I'm, a coach, we're all in it. We're in this together. We all have moments where we don't jump in. And why not? It's okay to say the wrong answer. I think it's just having ourselves that permission. So we're going to leave links in the show notes to your podcast, your book, your workbook, connections to LinkedIn. Is that the best way to connect with
Yeah.
you?
LinkedIn's great. On my website, any of those are perfect.
I like to leave with a story here. Can you share the story about your daughter? That was
Oh,
probably one of my favorite stories of visibility. Sometimes I think it's important to say, this isn't just in manufacturing, this is in your home.
yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's so important to think about this as not just professional. And I had figured out how to start being visible. My story of sitting in the back of the room and not being visible, I started to figure out how to do it at work. And then I'm sitting in the kitchen one night, and my daughter is talking about going out on a date with her boyfriend. And that it really didn't matter what she wanted to do. They were going to do what he wanted to do. And I said, oh my gosh. She's me from many years ago. I can just feel it. Set that example that other people's voices matter. What they want to do matters more than what we want to do. And so I said, what if you chose to pick the movie or you chose to do what you wanted to do? What would happen? Well, I don't know. I just think he wouldn't hear it. I said, but have you asked? Have you used your voice and asked? And I think that was just such an important moment for me to realize that I needed to change at home too. And so the funny part of that is that I told my husband he's getting a new wife after all these years because I needed to show up differently. I have two girls and a boy, and I wanted all three of them to start to recognize that their voice matters. No matter what situation they're in, they get to at least say something. It may not go their way, but if they don't say it, it definitely won't go their way. We have a lot of conditioning and limiting beliefs that it's not okay to speak up in certain situations. I would advocate for everyone to start to just try it, whether that's at home, whether that's at work. Just start to ask a question, just start to put something out there that allows your voice to be heard. And you're going to start to recognize that there's a lot more places that you could be speaking up than you are today.
It's
Hmm.
that story reading it just put chills down my back because it's like, what greater impact, right, than having your daughter be more visible. We talk about mental health and where things are at. What an impactful way to just make yourself. And like you said, it's not about the outcome. It's just about that my voice is heard, and it might not always go that way, but I know how to become visible and be who I am because that's the best version that people want. They just want to, who you are. And I just appreciate what you're doing and helping with visibility and helping manufacturing and sharing your message, because a lot of what we do at Manufacturing Greatness is help organizations leverage the resources they already have. And because I think we just miss out on that, we look to hire someone else, but we got the resources inside. So I think the combination here of you helping people become more visible and we're helping leverage resources, and it's like we can manufacture more in North America with the
Yeah.
people that we have, and it's just fantastic. Thanks so much, Sue.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.